Hey, so I just started playing Breath of the Wild last week, and so I'm currently going through that experience everyone else went through 2 years ago, when I'm realizing just how incredible this game is. Like the puzzles, they're so different to every other Zelda game. You don't push blocks, you roll boulders off mountains to kill enemies down below. And the music. Nintendo's composers somehow arranged the perfect set of piano accompaniments for your quest to save Hyrule. But what stood out to me more than any of that is the world. It feels so grounded, so real. I can totally imagine all of this being an actual place on Earth. The mountains, the grasslands, the oceans, something about it all just gives off this real world feeling. And so, that left me wondering, if Hyrule was a real place on Earth, where would it be? Now, at first glance, that seems like a pointless question. Zelda, like most of Nintendo's games, doesn't force itself into a specific time or location. It's just Hyrule, located inside the world of Zelda. At least, that's what I thought. But then I saw a clip which changed everything. For reference, this is Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of Zelda, and this is Eiji Aonuma, who's produced every single Zelda game from the last 15 years. They're currently being interviewed by reporter Ben Reeves from Game Informer. Take it away, Ben.
So the land's Hyrule, what's the planet called?
僕は地球
ですよね。
違う？
それ以外に何がわからない。
Yes, you heard that right. Hyrule is located on Earth. Sure, Eiji Aonuma seemed a little surprised by the revelation himself, but in terms of evidence, this is about as irrefutable as we're gonna get. Hyrule takes place on our very own planet, planet Earth. And that's great, but unfortunately we're still no closer to answering our question of where on Earth is Hyrule. Well, I first think it's important to establish the fact that we're never going to find a perfect fit. The globe is already looking pretty full, if you ask me. Alongside Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, South America, and Oceania, I'm just not sure there's room to slap another continent in there. But while there's never going to be a perfect fit, by looking carefully at clues that Zelda's developers hid inside Hyrule's many games and worlds, we can start to place down some of these kingdoms alongside the real-world kingdoms and countries of planet Earth. Let's start from the beginning, Zelda for the NES. Looking at the map, there's little in the way of landmarks here. While Death Mountain would eventually end up looking like this, back in 1985, it looked more like this. That's not quite as intimidating, is it? In fact, the only clue as to Hyrule's real-world location is the rather unsatisfactory variable of vibe. You see, Zelda's story, and more pertinently location, are all based on the classic legends of King Arthur and the like, and these stories all have something in common: Europe. And so, if we're going to go by Zelda 1 alone, all we can really glean is a sort of European vibe. And that's not a very satisfying answer, if you ask me. But if we jump forward to Ocarina of Time, we can already see some much stronger real-world links, no pun intended. Sure, the European vibe is still here and out in spades. Check out this castle, check out this town, they practically reek of Europe. But there's a much stronger real-world influence here, and it's not exactly a country, nor a continent, it's a religion. Come with me to the Fortress of the Gerudo, situated deep, or at least kinda sorta deep, inside Gerudo Valley. Notice this symbol over here, or here, or here. Seems innocuous enough, but this simple icon belies a much more complex and somewhat controversial story. You see, this is not the original Gerudo symbol. It's well documented by now that in the original version of the game, the Gerudo symbol actually looked like this. And if you know anything about the religion of Islam, this symbol should look familiar to you. It's almost identical to the Islamic star and crescent sign. There's subtle differences, sure. The Gerudo symbol faces to the left, whereas the star and crescent typically face to the right. The Gerudo symbol features a 4-pointed star, while the star and crescent feature 5 points instead. But at its core, these two symbols look almost identical. And that's not actually Ocarina of Time's only reference to the religion of Islam. There's another, one which is much more overt, and which caused much more of a stir upon discovery. Let's take a trip to the Fire Temple, shall we? Now, out of Ocarina of Time's temples, I think this is definitely one of the most iconic. Maybe not up on the level of the Water Temple, but it certainly sticks out from most of the game's other offerings. Now, this version I'm showing here is the very first version of the game, one which you might never have played before. And this version differed in one major way to the updated one. The background music of this temple included a recording of an actual Islamic call to prayer. I'm not Muslim, so I'm not sure if that's offensive to listen to, but just in case, feel free to skip forward 20 seconds if you don't want to hear, okay? Yes, that's actual Islamic chanting. In every later release of the game, this was changed to a simple MIDI choir sound, much in the vein of the Temple of Time's music. And so, with this information, we can pretty cleanly place the Gerudo region somewhere in the Middle East. Problem solved. But I'm still not satisfied. Ideally, I'd like to place the whole world of Hyrule onto our world map. And it turns out, Nintendo's latest entry in the Zelda series, Breath of the Wild, has got some pretty major clues, which will help us solve this mystery once and for all. Because, as I mentioned earlier, this world feels so grounded, so realistic. Irrespective of graphical style, I don't think Nintendo has ever designed such a rich, authentic feeling world. And it turns out that's absolutely not a coincidence. But to understand why that is, we need to delve a little into the game's history. Breath of the Wild began as a simple idea. Producer Eiji Aonuma and director Hidemaru Fujibayashi wanted a Zelda revolution. To achieve this, Fujibayashi devised something he called multiplicative gameplay. Instead of manually crafting a number of individual moments, individual puzzles, objects, solutions, he instead wanted to create systems, physics, chemistry, and such, and allow them to interact. But would this even work? Would it be any fun? And if it was, could Nintendo pull it off? To find out, they put together a test demo using the sprites and music from the original Legend of Zelda for the NES. However, this demo was different. You could burn bushes, but unlike the original game, this would start fires, engulfing entire forests. You could cut down trees and use their trunks as rafts to ride along the river. This demo showed off pretty clearly how game-changing this multiplicative gameplay could be. And so, it wasn't long before Nintendo's developers began work on the real game. And to do that, they would need to create a world unlike every other in the series. It would need to be big, huge even, much bigger than any other world that Nintendo's developers had designed in the past. That's not all though, this world had to be believable. Fujibayashi needed players to feel this was a real place, in order for them to intuitively know how to use all the systems. Burning trees, riding rafts, if players didn't feel like this world was a real place, they wouldn't instantly know how to harness its systems. And so, he began plotting out how the world would be laid out. But this task was not easy. He had 30-40 landmarks to place down, plus hundreds of shrines, buildings, and hidden areas. How on earth was he meant to put these together into a coherent and realistic world? Luckily, Fujibayashi had a trick up his sleeve. In his words, "When I first started looking at this game, I had Link in an empty field and I would just walk around and try to map out and get a feel for the distance and where landmarks should be. What helped me with this was my hometown, Kyoto. I took a map of Kyoto and overlaid it on the game world, and I tried to imagine going to places that I know in Kyoto. I'd think, it takes this much time to get from point A to point B, so how does that translate to the game?" And that's how we started mapping out the world in Breath of the Wild. And Kyoto's influence doesn't stop there. Satoru Takizawa, the game's art director, explained that Kyoto specifically was a perfect fit for Breath of the Wild and Hyrule. In his words, one thing that made it really easy is that there are so many tourist spots in Kyoto. You have all of these famous temples and shrines and whatnot. If I'm going from famous spot A to famous spot B and it takes me this long, it made it really easy to envision how that would translate to the game map. That's why Kyoto was such a good city to choose for this world. And you can see Kyoto's influence on Breath of the Wild's Hyrule just by looking around. The basic layout, for instance, there's a lower area right in the middle featuring some kind of palace, Hyrule Castle in one case and the Imperial Palace in the other. And that whole area is surrounded by rivers, again in both Breath of the Wild and also Kyoto itself. But more than that, the feeling of walking around Kyoto and the feeling of walking around Hyrule are eerily similar. It's not something clear that you can pin down. There aren't really many specific features they have in common, no buildings or landmarks that the two kingdoms share. But the feeling is so similar. And it's not surprising at all. I don't think it's an accident. I think Nintendo designed it to be just this way. So, to answer the question, where is Hyrule located, I think you could give multiple answers. You could say it's set in Europe, based on the European-looking buildings and European fairy tale-like story. You could say it's the Middle East, as indicated by Ocarina of Time's cut symbols and cut music. But I think the best answer, while perhaps not the most satisfying, for Hyrule's location, is Kyoto, Japan, the very place where Nintendo's developers crafted this world. Hey there! Thanks for watching to the end. I hope you found this interesting. For updates on future videos, be sure to follow me on Twitter @ThomasGDocs. Plus, you can subscribe to this channel to see my videos as soon as they come out. And I'll see you next week. Bye!